He was a father, a painter, a man of faith. But in truth, he was something far worse, a predator in human skin, a sadist, a cannibal. He murdered children and sent letters to their grieving families, describing every detail. This is the terrifying story of Albert Fish, the Boogeyman of America. Albert Fish was born May 19, 1870, in Washington, D.C. His childhood was plagued with instability. His father, Randall, died when Albert was just 5. His mother, overwhelmed and impoverished, placed him in St. John's orphanage. It was there that young Albert encountered brutality, routine beatings, whippings, and public humiliation. But unlike other children, Fish began to enjoy the pain. He would later say, "I was there until I was nearly 9, and that's where I got started wrong." By the time he reunited with his mother, he was already broken. Throughout his youth, Fish developed an obsession with sadomasochism. He engaged in self-harm, inserting needles into his groin and abdomen, some of which remained inside his body for years. X-rays would later reveal over 29 needles embedded in his pelvic area. But this was just the beginning. He became fixated on religious fanaticism, self-punishment, and sexual perversion, tying everything to scripture and purification. By his 40s, Fish had married and fathered 6 children. To outsiders, he seemed like an eccentric religious man, but behind closed doors, he was spiraling deeper into darkness. He began reading newspapers obsessively, focusing on crimes, violence, and cannibalism. He developed bizarre fetishes, including urine drinking, feces consumption, and self-flagellation. He would beat himself with a nail-studded paddle until he bled. In 1919, the urges became unbearable. He committed his first known murder. His victims were young children, boys and girls. He lured them with promises of money, candy, or errands. Then, once alone, he would torture, murder, and sometimes eat parts of their flesh. Fish was a wandering killer, traveling from state to state. He kept his crimes quiet, scattered, and unconnected. Authorities had no idea a single man was responsible. But then came the case of Grace Budd. In 1928, Albert Fish answered a classified ad placed by Edward Budd, a teenage boy looking for work. Posing as Frank Howard, a wealthy farmer, Fish visited the Budd family and promised to hire Edward. But what caught his eye was not the boy. It was his 10-year-old sister, Grace. On June 3, 1928, Fish returned to the Budd home and asked to take Grace to a children's party. The Budd family, trusting his grandfatherly appearance, agreed. Grace Budd was never seen alive again. What followed was 6 years of silence, a mystery that haunted the Budd family and the New York Police Department. Then, in November 1934, the Budds received a letter. Typewritten, yellowed, and filled with horror, the letter was from Albert Fish. In it, he described how he took Grace to an abandoned house. He told her to wait upstairs. And then, he strangled her, dismembered her, and cooked parts of her body in a stew. He wrote in graphic detail how he ate her flesh with carrots, onions, and strips of bacon. It was one of the most disturbing pieces of correspondence in criminal history. That letter, meant to torment, became his downfall. Police traced the envelope to a Manhattan boarding house. There, they found Albert Fish, calm, polite, and composed. When questioned, he admitted everything. With chilling detachment, he confessed to over 100 crimes, though only a handful could be confirmed. He spoke of Francis McDonnell, Billy Gaffney, and other victims. He described every killing with precision and pride. When asked why he did it, Fish replied, "It never gave me any pain, only pleasure." His trial began in March 1935. The court heard tales of cannibalism, flagellation, and delusions so grotesque that the jury had to pause multiple times. Psychiatrists diagnosed him as insane, but the jury declared him sane and guilty, driven not by madness but by pure evil. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair. On January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was executed at Sing Sing prison. When asked for final words, he said, "I don't even know why I'm here." His death was not peaceful. According to legend, the metal needles embedded in his body caused sparks and malfunctions during the execution, though this has never been confirmed. Albert Fish's story stands as one of the most horrifying in American history, not just because of what he did, but because of who he was. A man who blended into society, a father, a painter, a neighbor, and a monster. His case forced changes in how police handled missing children. It inspired books, films, and psychological studies. He became the blueprint for literary villains and nightmares. Because in the shadows of everyday life, evil sometimes wears a kind face. Thank you for watching The Boogeyman of America, Albert Fish. If this true crime story disturbed or fascinated you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more haunting documentaries from the real world. Remember the victims, stay safe, and always trust your instincts.